So now we're at a point where we can start digging into Rider itself. So once it's installed, when you first run it, this is the page you'll see. If you've used it before, you'll see a list of projects, your past projects here. You can create a new solution or open an existing one. There's also this starter tour down at the bottom, and this is really nice. I won't do it now because I'm going to guide you through the UI, but this is quite an interactive guide and it actually works really nicely. So I'd recommend going through there as well, but we won't do this now because I'm going to talk you through the UI. So what we're going to do, we're going to create a new solution. And for now, I'm just going to arbitrarily just choose a new Blazor app and click create. Using Windows, you quite often get this pop-up at the bottom for a new project saying that Windows Defender might affect your performance, and it allows you to configure it to exclude this project's folders. I won't do this now though. So this is the main Rider IDE. Now I've got this in dark mode. If I do the cog at the top right and choose settings, we'll talk about settings later. But if you go to appearance, then we've got dark mode here and we can switch to light mode. For this course, I'm going to use dark mode for two reasons. One, that's what I prefer, that's what I code in. And another, light mode does actually really trigger my migraines very badly. So I don't want that. So I'm going to use dark mode. I will try and make sure that the font is a decent size just to help with accessibility. So if I cancel this and let's have a walk around the UI. So on the left here, we've got the Solution Explorer, which if you've used Visual Studio, you're probably very used to. It's the same kind of concept. If this is hidden, you can click this icon here and you can toggle it here. And you can also see that if you hover over it, it shows you the keyboard shortcut. Now, just like in Visual Studio, top level, you've got your solutions, then you've got projects, and then you've got files inside. We'll talk more about things like dependencies throughout the course. And you've also got the option to right click, say, add a solution folder, which allows you to group your projects. You've got a few options around here. So this is quite useful. Sometimes you can toggle showing all the files versus just the ones that are about this project that are related. This will show all the other files within that file system. You can also change this drop down to be literally the file system, so you can see the main folder structure. You'll notice here that there's this idea folder. Now JetBrains, I believe for all their IDEs, create this .idea folder, and it's got various different configuration files in. Some of them you don't want to be checked into source control. Some you might do if you want to share some of these settings with different members of the team. There is this example gitignore file. So quite often, a lot of people would just in their gitignore completely ignore the idea folder. But if you want to be more specific, this is quite a good example. So going back to Rider, if we collapse this, we've got other options. If I change this back to Solution Explorer, we've got other options. So we can find throughout, we can collapse and expand everything. In this drop down, you can choose the behavior. So you can change a few settings, the appearance. So it mentions about hiding scratch and consoles, which is this. And later on in the course, we'll talk about scratches and consoles. Appearance has this thing called file nesting, which basically allows you to configure. Let's go to component, pages, no, layout. There we go. So like main layout, if we expand this, we can see there's another file within a file. It just allows you to group those together so you can customize your own if you want, just by going to appearance, file nesting. So that's the Solution Explorer tool window. We'll talk about some of the others shortly. Let's go along the top now. Now, if you go to the top left, we've got this burger menu. Clicking this gives you your top menu that you're probably used to seeing in a Windows application. It might be slightly different if you're using Mac or Linux. I very rarely go to here because I tend to use the keyboard shortcuts for things. You've also got this drop down where you can swap solutions. You can create a new solution or open something. You've got version control. So this isn't in Git at the moment, but you could from here change branches and do various things. We'll talk more about this and local history later on in the course. All of these things we're going to talk about. You can right click and say customize. So you can customize how this toolbar looks. We can start a build. We can do things like change what configuration, whether it's debug or release. If your solution has lots of different projects, you can choose between them here and edit different configurations. So I could do things like changing environment variables or program arguments. You can then run. So if I want to run it, then it's really easy to run this Blazor application we just created. If I do stop, I could do debug, and that would debug into it. Again, we've got a whole section on debugging later on. We can also do things like attach to process. We can profile with timeline and various other things. Next along, so this is something we're going to use an awful lot. Very rarely actually clicking on here because, as you saw in the mouse over, we've got Search Everywhere, Control T. If you're coming from Visual Studio and ReSharper, you'd be very used to Control T. Another shortcut instead of Control T is Shift. Now this pops up this, and this is something you're going to be using a lot because it searches through everything. We've got these tabs along the top so you can be more granular, but let's just stick with all. So we can search for files. So let's use app.razor for an example. That can find it. You could type in classes or methods or properties. It searches all kind of symbols. You can search for commands in the IDE. So for example, commit, like git commit. You can see here it searches settings, and we've got things like you can actually toggle settings in line without going to the settings dialog. So this is really powerful for finding things. You can even do things like if I type ML, then you can see main layout, it's taken just the capital letters of that word. So if you're searching for something and you kind of like know what words they are, you can kind of like do more fuzzy searching and search for substrings or just the capital letters. So it's very powerful for finding things. So if we collapse some of these panes and let's open one of the files, this cog window here, there's view mode at the bottom. So this allows you to change between a few different view modes, which is quite useful. So there's these like focus modes. So you can do like enter full screen, or if we do Zen mode, so Control Alt Shift Enter, then you kind of get this view where it gets rid of all the different UI and it's like a focus mode. So to Control Alt Shift Enter again to come back. Now obviously we've got the main code editor window here. So you can see along the top there's tabs. If I open a couple of them, you can see there's multiple tabs. You can drag to reorder. I can take one and actually drag it to the side so you can have a split screen view. If I open something else, I can then take that and drag it down. So especially if you've got a really big monitor, this is very useful. I can also drag one off the screen. Let's just drag it off and bring it back. So it's in its own window as well. So that's really powerful if you're working in multiple files at the same time. Looking at so we can see along the side, we've got all of these panes. We've seen Solution Explorer already. We've got services, run, which we saw before. This is the output we saw before. There's a terminal. We open this up. There's various along the right-hand side. So we've got like notifications. So you can see we saw that pop up before. It will also tell you about updates and various things. We've got AI Assistant, which we'll be looking at later. Databases, which we'll be looking at later. GitHub Copilot, which is an extension, which we'll also be looking at. Monitoring, and there's various other ones you can choose. If we do this drop down, we can see there's a lot of stuff here, a lot of which we'll be covering as we go through this course. You've got a status bar along the bottom, and this has got various information. We won't go through every single one, but we'll probably cover bits and bobs, like for example, the solution-wide analysis, which we'll definitely be covering later. And then at the bottom right, you get a bit of a status, like for example, showing that the build has succeeded or if it's failed. These tabs, so if I open up just one, for example, let's do services. By default, it's docked and you can resize like this. You've got this ... options. So there's various options. We can't go through them all in this course, but if I go to view mode, we'll see default is docked pinned. So you've got various options here. We can choose dock pinned. If you choose dock unpinned, if I go to the code, that'll go away. Where dock pinned, it wouldn't have done. Because it says docked, you can see that here we are at the bottom of our file. If I change this to view mode undocked, it's still kind of like docked here, but it's not docked as in the sense of if I click on the code, you can see it's hiding some of our code. We can't actually go to the bottom of our file because this is over the top. And as soon as you click away from it, it'll go away. So that's one option. You've also got the floating window. So that's just a floating window, but it isn't a main window. And lastly, if you choose a window, it becomes an actual window and it's in the Windows taskbar at the bottom, and it's got the usual, it's a full-fledged Windows window. So if I go back to docked, you can redock it there. So that's useful if you've got other monitors and you want to have different windows in different monitors. Once you're happy with your layout, you can also do, if you do this burger menu, we can do window, layout settings, and you can actually save and restore. I believe there's also a plugin to allow you to save and restore named, like different layouts. I can't remember what it's called, but we'll talk about plugins later on in the course. I will leave that as a user exercise to find that plugin if you do want to do that. There's also, with these panes, there's some really nice keyboard shortcuts. If I've got this pane with focus, and this applies to any of the panes, I can do Control, Shift, Alt, and the cursor keys. Now, obviously, substitute Control with Command for mark. But if I do that and then press the up and down arrows, I can, from the keyboard, very quickly resize stuff. If this has got focus, I can resize this. So that's much nicer than like trying to find the pixel with the mouse and dragging and dropping up. Just being able to do that is much nicer. In fact, let me just change that back to pinned, because that's what the default is. Speaking of shortcuts, a lot of these tool windows have shortcuts. So if I hover over them, a lot of them say like structure is Control Alt and F. We can see Explorer is Control Alt and L, and Explorer is actually Alt and 1 as well. So you can toggle that. So this is quite a nice thing about Rider as well. I think unless it's changed in Visual Studio, there's shortcuts to show things like the Solution Explorer, but it's not a toggle, so you can't show it then get rid of it again. Where a lot of the shortcuts to show these panes in Rider is a toggle, which is quite powerful. There's also, if I just get up one of the panes, if I do Control, Shift and apostrophe, then it toggles it being full screen, that pane, which is quite useful, especially for Git, which we'll look at later because Git has like the log and everything. Another useful shortcut is Control, Shift and F12, which basically collapses all of the panes so you can just see your code window and you can toggle that as well. And the last thing I want to talk about is the settings, and we've already seen here, we can go to settings here. We can do it from this file menu, or you can just press Control, Alt and S. There's a lot of settings. I can't go through all of these, but here we can actually search for them. And as you saw earlier, from the Shift or Control T pop-up where you can search for everything, you can also search for settings. So whilst I'm not going to go through these now, I would recommend just flicking through and getting an idea of what kind of settings you've got in here. You do also have this option at the bottom, backup and sync. So you can sync these options to your account. So that means if you're using Rider on different machines, you can automatically sync those settings and plugins across devices. So that was just a quick speed tour of Rider. We'll obviously cover a lot more detail throughout this course. In the next section, we're going to talk about creating different types of .NET projects.